welcome back to another episode of Law Scholars, and actually, I want to do something a bit different for this episode. Everything that I've done thus far, at least since the start of law school, has been to just go over actual law material, and instead I want to give a little bit of law school advice, or rather just talk about law school lifestyle for a bit, and this is something that I don't do very often because there are a lot of other law school lifestyle blogs out there, law school lifestyle podcasts, and so it's something that I don't want to make my emphasis just because you can find all this material elsewhere. And I want to focus on just the law school material because that's really, actually, to be honest, 100% most of all I have time to actually do. But I did end up writing a little article to just share a little bit of law school advice, and so I want to go over some of the material in that article as well as just to spew a couple of feelings if anybody's actually interested in hearing those feelings. I do want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of law school, at least some of the pros and cons that I've seen, and then I also want to go over these tips and tricks that I have found that have helped me to be successful in law school. And I actually want to hear what you guys think as well. What do you think is a pro of law school or a con of law school? And what tips and tricks have you used to actually find success and still manage a manageable lifestyle? And in fact, I'll put the link to this of that article in the show notes of this episode just so that you can go and honestly just comment on that article. So what are some of the pros and cons of law school? And one thing that you're going to notice as I go over a couple of these things in my head is that a lot of the cons and a lot of the pros are going to be the exact same thing. One thing that I see as a pro is also going to have a con, and the reason for that is because no matter what you do, there's going to be a benefit and there's going to be a cost to any approach that you take. So let's go over a couple of those. Well, one pro of law school is that you have a curve. And a curve is nice because it actually gives you good grades. What's the con of the curve? Well, a con of the curve is ultimately, even if you don't know the material as well as you should, you could still ultimately get an A. And the reason for that is because a curve is based off of how you compare to your classmates. And so this is really, in my opinion, kind of just a big con because even though you can get that A, you're comparing yourself to how your classmates are. And why is that a con? Well, the reason for that, in my mind, is because if you don't have as smart of a class, and I do think that I have a smart class, that's not what I'm trying to say. I think that if you do have not as smart of a class, well, then you can still perform very well in comparison to your class, but ultimately, you may not know the legal material as well as you would like. Obviously, the law of averages is going to negate that con, where once you get enough people, you're going to have enough smarts, so to speak, to be able to actually have a successful class and a smart class and perform well. What's another pro and another con of law school? Well, this is probably Drake specific. But one thing that I've really enjoyed for Drake is how they set up their first semester for law school students. They set it up to where first-year law schools students have it easy, in a sense. They schedule the contracts final early so that you can have feedback back before the end of the semester, before you take your other doctrinal classes. And then also we're finishing legal research and legal writing, and ultimately that's the reason why I decided to do this episode, because legal research and legal writing is coming up, and after this weekend I'll only have criminal law, civil procedure, and torts to focus on for the next few weeks before finals. And so a pro of having that is that I will have plenty of time to study for finals. The con is that it just messes with my schedule a bit. It's nothing too crazy of a con, but it really would be nice to remain consistent throughout the semester. That's a couple of pros and cons of law school that I can see. If I think of any more, I might say them in a bit, but let's move on to just talking a little bit about some tips for how I have found success in law school. Like I just said, we had our contracts midterm, and, well, our contracts final. It still feels like a midterm, but we had our contracts final, and contracts final went well, and I attribute that going well a lot because of how I have handled my study material. So what have I done? Well, there's really 3 tips that I want to go over. The first is to review often. Second is to review in as many ways as possible. And the third thing is to be accountable to others. So how have I personally done those things? Well, review often. I honestly review my material, I want to say 5 to 6 times before I actually end up moving on from that material. So for example, and this is kind of tied into the reviewing in as many ways as possible, but I will read the material, I'll take notes on it, I'll go to class and hear it again, and then I will, after class, update my outlines. So I'll go over it again, and then after that, I do a little podcast episode, so I go over it again, and ultimately, all those things combined together results in me going over the material a ton to try and ingrain it in my head. So what about reviewing as often in as many ways as possible? Well, I think there have been studies done that actually show that the more ways that you can influence your brain to study the material, the more that material is actually ingrained in your head to where you won't ever really forget it again. And so I did mention a couple of things of what I end up doing to help me study for that material. I obviously read, and then I write it down. So I'm engaging 2 activities there. And then afterwards, I'm going to class and I'm listening and taking notes. And that's engaging a third of audio. After that, I come back and I write it down again. So going back to writing. After that, I say it out loud to myself. And so I'm going into this audio format again, and I listen to it afterwards, so that's audio format again. And ultimately, all these things, taking all these different methods of learning, engaging different parts of my brain, helps me recall that information easier. So really what I'm trying to say with this section is that explore different techniques and use several techniques for taking your notes. Ultimately, I think you should use a creative technique to engage a creative side of your brain. If you like reading, great. If you like writing, great. But I also think that you should use a creative outlet to release this information, something that's more challenging on your brain. And so if it's more challenging on your brain and it's challenging material, well, then you actually ingrain it more in your head. And so take a creative approach as well. For me, my creative approach is to do these podcast episodes, going over it again, audio version, and ultimately trying to present as if I am trying to be a professional, and sometimes I'm not good at that. But that's a creative way for me to ingrain this material in my head. For you, it could be about writing a poem about the material. outlining the rules through poetry, or it could be doing it in a drawing, a comic, if that's something you're into. Any way that you can just practice this material would be really beneficial. And the third way to really find success in law school is to be accountable. Accountable to others and accountable to yourself. This website and these podcast episodes is a way for me to be accountable. There's not a ton of people who listen to the podcast. There's not a ton of people who go to the website. But I am putting a fair amount of work into it as if it's going out to thousands. And I don't present myself the best way as if it's going out to thousands. But I do try my best to actually care that other people are seeing what I'm seeing and seeing what I'm learning. And so by me being accountable to everyone else, it makes sure that I learn the material and try and put it out there in a clean way. And ultimately, it's helping me learn. So I guess just summing it all up, everything that I've talked about so far. There are pros and there are cons of law school. I went over a couple of pros and cons. And I want to finish with one last pro and con. And it's really just a pro. Law school is an opportunity for you to make friends. It's competitive, for sure. People want to see that they're doing well. There's a lot of comparison, for sure. But ultimately, you do develop a lot of friends in law school. There are a lot of professional people here, a lot of smart people here, a lot of people who want to be good people and help other people. And I'm grateful to be a part of that. As far as tips and tricks go, review often, review in as many ways as possible, and be accountable to others. Thank you all for keeping me accountable. Despite sometimes feeling like I'm boring, knowing that I'm boring. I do appreciate those who listen and those who do learn and those who do follow along as I go across this law school journey. And I know this was a bit of a cheesy episode. Again, it's not edited, so I'm spewing a lot of things off of my head. But I do appreciate everything that you guys do for me. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Law Schoolers. Before I let you go, there are 4 things I want to say. The first thing is if you enjoyed these episodes and if you enjoyed the website, I would invite you to go and join Law Schoolers Pro. And you can do that by going to lawschoolers.com/join. It's a way for you to support us, but there's also a lot of features there that I think you will enjoy. Second thing is that nearly all of our episodes are unedited. The only ones that aren't are pre-law materials, and the reason for that is so you can actually see the legal material in its raw form as I'm learning it as well. The third thing is that the information contained in these episodes are specifically only for educational purposes. They're not to be used as legal advice, and with that, the fourth thing is if it is used as legal advice, we are not liable. That is, Law Schoolers is not liable for any legal outcomes. Thank you again for enjoying the show. Have a good one.